We sat down with our political panelists, Kerry, Benjoe and Niigaan Sinclair this week to talk about two different topics in the news. One being Melanie Mark, a First Nation woman resigning from the legislature in British Columbia. We also discussed the recent NBA All-Star game in Salt Lake City, Utah, where Jully Black made a not-so-subtle change to O Canada. Niigaan, Kerry, great to have you with us as always. Let's start with BC MLA Melanie Mark, who has resigned, comparing the legislature to, in her words, a torture chamber. Niigaan, what do you think? This is not the first Indigenous woman in politics to raise these types of concerns.
No, certainly. I mean, this is something that Niigaan, who's an MP here in Winnipeg, talks about regularly. Tina Keeper talked about that as well. And, you know, it's not just the violence against an Indigenous representative, but also the fact that it's violence against an Indigenous woman. And when Melanie Mark resigned, she commented that she was regularly called really inappropriate names. Rhymes with witch is the word that she said that she was regularly called, and that's just simply unacceptable. The kind of decorum that is in Parliament really wouldn't pass any sort of workplace in any other place in the country. People would be held up and for harassment and assault when it comes to the rancor and oftentimes racial epitaphs which are thrown across the chamber. And so I'm not surprised at all that she's just fed up and had enough. You know, being a politician in Canadian politics is hard enough, but then throw in racism, misogyny, and outright violence by men in power and privilege, and this is what you get.
Kerry, there in Saskatchewan, Betty Nippy Albright once pulled out of the NDP leadership race, saying Saskatchewan wasn't ready for a strong Indigenous woman to be leading a provincial party. What do you make of MLA Mark's resignation?
It doesn't surprise me. It is unfortunate that Indigenous women have fought so hard to get to this position. And to be silenced, I think that is the biggest issue. Being an Indigenous woman, being racially profiled, insulted on a regular basis is just part of life. I think the biggest issue is being silenced, being put in a place of power and having that opportunity to bring voices forward and being silenced. I think that is probably the most damaging that they can do to Indigenous women in power.
Kerry, like I said, Betty Nippy Albright said the province, Saskatchewan, wasn't ready for that yet. What is it going to take for a province, any of these provinces, the federal politics, to be ready?
I don't know, perhaps a different party, maybe an alternative party, because right now it's just status quo. And until things take a major change, I don't think we're going to see much change. Not in my lifetime, anyway.
Niigaan, like you said there, you've mentioned Tina Keeper, who we have coming up on Face to Face, talking about this. And despite that, there's been a huge increase every year or every election of the number of Indigenous people running for politics. Do you think this kind of puts a stain on all that?
Well, it puts a stain on it, but, this isn't just tied to Indigenous peoples. I mean, the fact is that we live in a society in which Indigenous peoples are seen as lesser than, and we're racially profiled from everywhere, from going to a convenience store to seeing movies to we have an ongoing situation of rampant violence happening against murder missing Indigenous women and girls. This is something that Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP, deals with regularly, and also, Wab Kinew in Manitoba, who, by the way, likely is to become the very first First Nations premier, if you're to believe the polls, has been regularly profiled by other parties. People regularly attack. And what oftentimes, particularly white men, would get away with in terms of issues in their past or comments that they've made or current behavior. For white men, this is just a blip in their career. They work out just fine. But if you're a brown person, and particularly a brown woman, then what they do is it's a real all-out scale attack. And particularly for Indigenous women, the only issue, as it were, is that they're strong speakers. They're smart, they're brilliant, and that seems to be abnormal enough in Canadian politics to be called angry as this, swear words, and then on top of that, just be told that they're not welcome here. And then what happens is what Kerry talked about, which is silencing. And if that continues to happen in Canadian politics, we're all lesser than as a result.
Shifting gears now to the world of sports that also crossed over into politics. Jully Black singing "O Canada, Our Home on Native Land" that led to a lot of approval, but also some disapproval. Niigaan, what did you make of all that?
Well, what I've said to different media outlets about this is never has so much been made of so little. This is one word. A yes in a national anthem, yes at the NBA All-Star Game, yes in an extremely high-profile position. But this is the kind of allyship that every Canadian should be taking in every step in their life, in their living rooms, in their boardrooms, everyday life. This should be what allyship looks like, thinking about our relationships with Indigenous peoples. All Jully Black really did is what territorial acknowledgements, which is something that you hear regularly at meetings, government offices, and so on. What you hear people say is, we recognize that we share lands with these nations and we commit to a spirit of reconciliation. That's all she did, is by changing a word in the national anthem, is she showed allyship and shared power. So good for her. But I think it's something that every Canadian should be doing. And absolutely anyone who's freaking out about this, if you're worried about that, then I got some bigger issues to talk about. Like, when are we going to return stolen land? When are we going to share lands and resources and the tremendous profit that's been exploited from First Nations? And when are we going to start treating Indigenous peoples like human beings?
Kerry, good points, Niigaan. Last word to you, Kerry, your thoughts on Jully Black and the reaction to her changing one word in the national anthem.
I think it really ties into allowing women to speak, allowing women to say what they want to say. She took the opportunity and just spoke. And I think this is one of the reasons why the powers that be, the status quo, want to keep women silenced, because we speak from the heart, we speak with truth, and I think that breeds fear in people because it breeds change. It gets wheels thinking, people moving, and people are afraid of change, and that's what I see with this. There's so much backlash, and I think it's really important that Jully Black did this now, because on social media there is a movement of Indigenous erasure. There's this growing number of people within the Black community who are claiming that Indigenous people aren't the first people from Turtle Island. And I think it's really important that Jully Black acknowledge that this is Native land.
Kerry and Niigaan, always great to speak with you and see you. Appreciate you both taking some time for the panel this week.
Yeah, me much. Thanks.